Hey y'all, welcome to the Clock Tower. I'm Colton here with Brandon. BSF 2024 is not over, but it's very close to over. There's one event left in the schedule. It's the France regional that got pushed back because of the French snap elections. That is not until August, so Brandon and I have decided to go ahead with our BSF 24 season recap. It was a busy season. 17 regionals to talk about. Nearly 400 players got a top over the course of the season. A lot of stuff to get to, a lot of data to parse through. Brandon and I have already done a lot of the sifting through kind of the raw data, and now we're ready to talk about all the stuff that we've learned.
Colton's put together this great spreadsheet that we're looking to look at. It's going to be on the screen here. This goes over a lot of the top decks and helps break down this idea across in a little bit more condensed way. So instead of looking through mountains of data sheets and mountains of different regional events, that we can kind of break down and look and see what's all here at once.
So, to that end, before we dive into what's on the screen, a couple of notes. Note number one, and the most important note, Avis and Alexander are incredible. Avis has kept up the master post all season long, gets the deck lists for all of the top decks. Alexander has attempted the Herculean task of assembling every deck in Spring Fest. And this year collected, out of the 1,881 decks played in Spring Fest 2024, Alexander collected nearly 1,200 decks with sets and over 1,000 decks that have a finisher or climax combos or some kind of indicator of what the deck is supposed to do. Incredible data from Alexander, and I'm linking his stuff in the description. Thank you, Alexander, for your hard work. This does not happen without you. Thank you, Avis, for keeping up the master post and updating us on all the deck lists all season long. This doesn't happen without you. Those two are rock stars and absolute pillars of the Weiss community, especially those of us who are in the competitive scene and want to know in detail what the meta looks like. So thank you so much to them for all of their hard work. Links in the description to both of them. They're the ones who make this happen.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you guys so much for making that happen, because especially as we look over this data here, we're able to see some different patterns that kind of stick out that really help inform us as to how the season both went and also potentially where things go as well.
Right, and because we have representation data for the set, at least, for almost 2/3 of the decks played, this representation percentage, while not, perfect necessarily, there's definitely some variance there, there are still hundreds of decks that we just don't know because they weren't reported by the people who played them. But that representation data is actually really useful because this is over half of the decks played, well over half of the decks played are represented in that column. Another note about how the data is presented, we do have it broken down by set, and then underneath that we have the individual deck within the set, or in the case of Hololive we have the Gura top end and then broken down a little more specifically. So all of the ones that are below a heading, they add up to the number at the top. The numbers don't always add up all the way because there are a couple of random things that got some tops that there's just not really room for on the graphic, or maybe it's a 1 or 2 deck kind of situation where we don't want to spend too much time talking about it. This is just to kind of give us a broad overview of the meta kind of in one place. And the representation numbers, while not perfect, help us with that. However, the tops, we have all 385 reported topping decks in this data set. There are 3 that are missing. It's one team from Mexico that we never got a report for. That's the only top that we're missing. So all 385 of the other decks are all in here. So almost 100% of all the tops are in here, recorded by both Avis and Alexander. As well as all the wins. All 49 winning decks are in here as well. Okay.
Let's do it.
We're going to go in order of top percentage. Now, another note about representation percentage and top percentage. Representation is percentage of all the decks in the meta. So that number will top out at 33.3%. You cannot have a representation percentage higher than 33.3 because you're on a team of 3. In all but one very small event, you were on a team of 3. Same with top percentage. That adds up to 100%. So if you had, 33.3% of all the tops, that means that you topped every single tournament in every single slot in that top 8. So, just so that we are abundantly clear on what those numbers mean. The deck that everyone's talking about, the most important deck from the meta, Stock Soul Bar, Chainsaw Man, all of the wins, almost all of the tops, nearly 100 tops for Chainsaw Man, which is significantly higher than the next step down, and it was almost all one deck. Like, for comparison's sake, Stock Soul Bar had almost twice as many tops as Gura, and had twice as many top 4s and twice as many wins. There was so much Aki in this meta. But Aki's been hit to 2. And the Stock Soul combo, which is a resource generation machine that really makes that package pop off, is now on a choice restriction with the bomb that bonds to the Easy Revenge event, which is a good play on its own, but also enables the Aki to do more damage. I don't think there's any question that Aki is the most important deck in the meta and should absolutely be on the top tier of any tier list you make for 2024 Spring Fest, in retrospect.
Yeah, looking back, and even when we were in beginning of season, looking forward, we knew that was going to be the top deck, and it definitely came as expected. It had the dominating force that we expected it to have, and it continued that throughout the season.
So that being said, what's next for Chainsaw Man? We talked about this briefly a couple of weeks ago, but with the ban, with the restriction, the Stock Soul Bar list is literally not playable. Like, you are not allowed to play the list as it used to be, right? Because you're, at the very least, if you play the Stock Soul, you are out all of your stock bombs. You're out 2 of your Akis no matter what you do. Is Aki the top end of the future? And if so, or if not, what does the mid-game look like?
So we talked about last time that we suspect it might switch over to the choice packages with the salvage combo in the mid-game. We are probably going to see a lot more of that. We could still see some more of the same kind of build, just with the restrictions in place. There's a lot of flexibility here with Chainsaw Man. It just loses a lot of its consistency with these pieces that it got hit with, and it loses some of the edge at the top there that it was trying to close people out with. So it's gonna be, because it's a less consistent deck, I don't think we're going to see it as often. I think we might still see iterations of this kind of deck, but it's definitely not going to be at the same level and same tier that it was during this last season.
Yeah, Chainsaw Man's strength, the Aki top end specifically, was that it was very low to the ground and gave you good damage output for very little investment, which allowed you to kind of do all kinds of stuff in the mid game. It allowed you to be pretty modular. It allowed you to play into whatever matchup you're looking at. Aki is still obviously very cheap, but now you're looking at, if you really want to play the Stock Soul, you're going to need to find other ways to get into your Easy Revenges, right? So you're not just going to be able to bond into them like you were before. And you're also going to need to, play the off finishers. You're going to need to find something to put in that third lane. And I don't think that's going to be a big problem. I think that Chainsaw Man has enough off finishers that you'll still have a good top end with Aki. Maybe not quite as consistent. The ceiling will almost certainly be lower, but it's still a perfectly solid top end. I think you could still make the Aki work. But losing the Stock Soul combo, I think, is a big deal. And if you decide to go with the Stock Soul, I think losing the Bonder is a big deal. I think most people are going to try to stick with the Stock Soul over the Bonder, just because the Stock Soul is such a good combo. But the deck has to be extremely different, and I would not be surprised to see, and I expect, as of right now, I expect that the choice salvage list will be the Chainsaw Man of the future.
So cutting the bonder is the big play here because you can pick up the events off of the brainstorm. But also at the same time, you're spending more stock to try to make that happen as opposed to just the free go and get.
So moving on to Hololive. Hololive, 16% representation. So on about half of teams, a top percentage that was a little bit higher than that. And that also is kind of something you're looking for. If the top percentage is higher than the rep percentage, that means that the deck performed above its expectation, right? If a deck is 10% of the meta and it's getting 10% of the tops, that is expectation. That is a replacement level kind of performance. If it's above that, it means that it is getting more tops than you would expect out of, say, like a random draw, right? 16% of decks should get 16% of tops, but when 16% of decks are getting almost 18% of tops, that's an indicator, hey, this deck performs better than a lot of other stuff in the meta. And most of Hololive, but not all of Hololive, was something paired with Gura. 47 total tops for Gura, 23 top fours, and 6 wins. Most of those were Caligura. I think after Worlds in particular, people moved off of the Standby Gura. Not entirely, obviously. There's still definitely Standby Gura running around in BSF. But I think a lot of people ultimately came to understand that the choice was just the more consistent option. You're not getting triple Gura in the Cali package. It's just not happening. Unless things are going super bad or super well. You will get double, and you will throw a whole bunch of damage at the board over the course of the game. And that consistent damage over the course of the game allows you to play from ahead. You are in the lead for most of the game, and then all you need is double Gura, which is extremely consistent. And the list did very well in relation to its tops, right? 32 tops, but then out of those 32 tops, it got 21 top fours and 5 wins. So the deck converted those tops into wins at a rate higher than you would expect, right? Because, 1/8 of tops will win. That's how top 8 works. But with Gura, it was closer to 1/6. And I think that matters. I think that Gura ignores a lot of good things. Like, Gura does not care about what SDS does or what Chainsaw Man does, or it really doesn't care about most other decks' lines of play. And there's very little that shuts off Gura. So if you're trying to play counterplay, there isn't much for you to do into Gura. It's very hard to shut off Gura with anything other than like a tap counter or like a money counter or neg soul counter that we just don't really see. So it makes sense to me that Caligura finally emerged as the top Gura list. Gura, of course, has been limited to 2. Going forward, it definitely has an effect on the deck. I think it affects the standby list a lot more, because in the standby list, you're trying to get the 3rd Gura down because you're not pushing damage over the course of the game, because you're not slamming 1k1s. So you're just missing out on, even if you only slam a CX twice, that's 6 damage that you're missing out on if you're in the standby list, so you need to make that up with the top end. So I think you need triple Gura more in the standby list, whereas in the Caligura list, you don't. 2 is your number. So even if you only have 2 Guras in the whole deck, you can still make that work with fixing. It will require you to play a little bit better, and you might need to add a consistency piece or two to make sure you get both of your Guras. But I don't see any reason why Caligura specifically shouldn't continue to perform well. Representation will drop just because it got hit, and people will pivot to things that haven't been hit. That's just what happens. But I think if you stick with Caligura, I think you have a very good chance of doing well still in the upcoming BCS.
No, I think the shift to Caligura was actually really important here. I think the ability to stick damage over the course of the game, especially starting really early, was a big deal here. Especially being able to slam Climax early, move through the deck quicker, I think is actually one of the big parts of it too, that mill engine of that deck. But I think also seeing that transition, that shift to Caligura for Hololive was definitely a big impact here. I think the big contrast here is the Gura to 8 standby. That Gura definitely outclassed the 8 standby variant that we expected to see a little bit more of coming through the season. That being said, when Gura got hit with the ban list, we also got a hit to the 8 standby list, with the effectively it hitting the Luna and then the drop search. When they did that, they did kind of like try to like tie that in with Gura in the initial like description. So it at least brings some suspect as to like why that was getting hit the way it was. It did get hit regardless. So going forward, we expect that to kind of impact that standby list going forward. We also do know that Hololive has more support coming here in the fall, so maybe that will have something to do with it. But with that being said, we just recognize that 8 standby, the other build that saw a good majority of the tops for Hololive, did also get hit.
Yeah, and it was odd how they announced the Luna Mio choice restriction.
Yeah, we didn't bring it up last time intentionally. Like it just we wanted to more emphasize the ban itself versus like Bushiroad mistakes. But I think it also was like worthwhile to mention here because of the representation of it.
Yeah, and I'm willing to chalk that up as the intern was writing something at the end of a long day and just, threw some words down on the paper and submitted something that didn't make sense. I'm willing to buy that. Just choosing to give him the benefit of the doubt on that. But yeah, it was an odd hit. Like, this is the one hit that made really no sense to me. I at least understood the other ones. This one doesn't make sense to me. 8 standby was not, like, dominant like that. It was on one winning team. Like, it was on one winning team out of 17 regionals. That's not the kind of thing that you want to hit. But like you said, there's more support coming. Maybe they see something in the offing, and they don't want to... and they don't want 8 standby to get out of control. I don't know. I haven't seen anything like that, but maybe there's something that's going to make 8 standby significantly better when the new stuff drops. In any case, I think that was an odd choice. But 8 standby definitely had a really good season. And early on, I agree with you. I think we were expecting to see more of it. But then as the season progressed, we saw it pick up more and more. We saw more people playing it, I think, as the season went along. And a good player on 8 standby Hololive is, I think, scarier than a good player on even Chainsaw Man. Because 8 standby just has multiple ways to mess with you and to get advantage over you. And it's hard to play around all of them. It's a very skill-intensive list, but in the hands of a good player, it's very, very dangerous. So, yeah, I don't know if I don't think it deserved a ban. I don't think it deserved a hit yet. I think it was one of the better decks in BSF, and I think it's a deck that's poised to do well in BCS. I don't think the restriction really affects it all that much, which is why I guess I'm not really that upset about it. I don't think it changes what it does too much. As much as the Mio is extremely powerful, there are plenty of other good drop searchers that you can just shove into 8 standby and do just fine. So we'll see what happens to it. I think that it's perfectly fine, and I think you can absolutely play it in the fall once we, see how people put the new stuff into the archetype as well. Next on the list, Avatar. There was one list that mattered. It was, of course, Bar Standby. Sokka is dead. I also think this deck is dead. I think the whole thing that made this deck super dangerous was the Sokka stuff, was the extra attacks at all levels of the game, was the super cheap 8-9 attack nonsense it was pulling off with the Azula combo. That's what made this deck click. The deck is not bad without that stuff. It is a average, kind of mid-tier kind of thing. It would still have gotten a handful of tops this season, I think. But it was clearly a design mistake. They did fix it, to my surprise and delight. And we're basically never going to have to talk about Avatar in a competitive context again until and unless we get Avatar 2. Because this deck is not better. Now that Sokka's gone, this deck is not better than anything else that has like a breakdown on this graphic. It's down in the other tops.
Yeah, that hit definitely drops Avatar down a really good amount. Um, yeah, at best it can be a dark horse going in to next season.
And the thing that sucks is, like, I understand the argument that people are making where it's like, you nuked the whole set. Yeah, you kinda did. But the only good thing the set was doing was bad for the game. And even if you wanted to, like, choice restrict Sokka with, all the other stuff, right? One, it means that you have to preemptively ban even more cards if you decide to do Avatar 2, which would sell extremely well. There's no way Bushiroad isn't at least thinking about an Avatar 2. And the Sokka on its own is only an okay card if it doesn't have the attack step shenanigans. Like, it is a double Ricky, right? It's a on-play, on-death Ricky, but it is a summon Ricky. So its uses are a little bit more limited. You can't get anything into your hand off of it. You're getting something onto the board, which is good, but not great. And if you can't do that during the attack step, like, there are not a whole lot of summon Rickies that people are playing. Most people prefer the Ricky to hand. And even if it is a double Ricky, I don't think that profile is all that great without the attack step stuff it was doing. And the set does have another Ricky. It's a salvage Ricky, which I'm not a huge fan of, but it does choose from the top 3 something to clock, so you don't have to clock a CX, you can choose your color and all that. And it also gives you more targets for your salvage. I don't think it's a great card, but I think if you were playing fair Avatar, I think that you could slot the Zuko Ricky in there and get almost as much out of it as the Sokka. And again, like, I understand it's double. I understand you get the on-death trigger. I understand that. It makes sense.
I think it's the end of. I think it's where actually the Sokka Ricky really comes into play for any other deck is the end of 0, beginning of 1, when you have it on the board and your opponent gets rid of it going into level 1. You're already level 1, so you can spawn out your level 1 combo in place of it. So it's effectively a pay 1 clock 1 to get your combo.
That's like 90% of what people are using Rickies for is to go get level 1 combo. That's like why Ricky's a good profile. So, like, yeah, like, I get it. Like, I don't think it's a bad card, but it just, if you were playing Sokka in a fair Avatar list, you can sub the Zuko Ricky in there and you'll do fine. It is a worse card. I'm not saying it's not a worse card. It's definitely a worse card. But, like, if not having your double Ricky nuked your whole set, your set was bad. Like, if you were playing fair Avatar and not having Sokka nuked your non-Azula deck out of the sky, then your deck was already way too fragile to be considered as a meta threat. So, and, like, I think that if Avatar 2 happens, I would love to see them get a good normal Ricky so that we can put this conversation to bed forever. But, yeah, like, Sokka needed to be banned. It needed to be banned to prevent any, future shenanigans, future interactions. It was a design mistake that should never be repeated. And also, I think that the banning of the card is also an indicator to us as players that they aren't going to make this mistake again. They've made this mistake twice now, and they have outright banned this mistake twice. I don't think they'll make it again. Very excited for Bushiroad to decide in its infinite wisdom that they want to try a third time, and it'll be different this time. I mean, joke's on me for ever trusting Bushiroad. Like, they'll do something really good, like, deliver a ban list 3 months in advance of the season. Thank you, Bushiroad. We appreciate that. And then the next month they'll announce, something ridiculous that makes no sense and makes me remember, oh, right, Bushiroad is not always very good at running this game. In fact, oftentimes they are bad at running this game. Anyway, moving on. So those 3 decks were the ones that got hit. Let's talk about stuff that didn't get hit, and some people wished it would. Slime had a good season, 23 tops, 7 top 4s, 1 win. Mirren is the thing. Usually it plays the Benimaru at the top. Your plussing combo is either level 1 standby, sometimes you see empty standby, or it's the level 0 Pants Rimuru back row combo. I think there's a lot more traction on the latter right now, on the 8 Pants list. The book top end seems to be pretty gone. It still exists, but it's not getting any kind of consistent representation. Standby was kind of the replacement choice for Shizu when the Shizu Mirin choice restriction went into effect. And that still seems to be the primary way people are playing it, but the Rimuru back row Pants combo is getting a lot more traction as level 0 back row combos that do good things become more and more in vogue, a la Chainsaw Man and SES.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think that, like, especially looking at the season, Slime, having been now, was like fourth essentially in representation data here, we're definitely going to see Slime as towards the top of this next upcoming meta. I don't think the list is going to change any from last season into this season.
Yeah, I agree. The decision is whether or not you're going to play Standby or Pants to supplement the Mirin. The Benimaru top end is still what it is, and that's probably Slime's biggest weakness, I would say, is the fact that the Benimaru is just not that good of a top end, but it is also combo-less, and it allows you to play some pretty ridiculous plussing stuff at all levels. So we'll see, but Slime is an early pick to be one of the best decks, if not the best deck, in the upcoming BCS meta. The other deck in that conversation, one of the other decks in that conversation, is SDS. SDS is my pick for best deck in the new format, I think, out of like the stuff people are talking about, because it really does not care what the opponent is doing. The Elizabeth plussing stuff is just really good, and Hendrickson is a really good top end. Burn 4 with a Mocha 1 attached to it, that's a lot of damage. The Resident Dragon Maid player in this conversation likes Burn 4s a lot. I'm a big fan of Burn 4. Burn 4 is great. And when you get a Mocha 1 on top of it, like, looking at the top card of your opponent's deck, seeing that it's a CX, and then knowing that you just won the game, it's pretty nice. I think Hendrickson's really good. Escanor's not coming back until and unless there is a restriction lifted. But yeah, the Hendrickson list is really good, guys.
Yeah, no, it definitely is. It definitely is really good, and I think it's going to see a lot of play this season. This is definitely a potential pick here that can stand up to the things going on. I would put it in definitely top 3. It's real close in contention with the top 3, I think, as to like what's currently there. I would probably put it just behind Slime personally, but like it's really right there.
Yeah. I think you and I are in agreement that of the stuff that out of the stuff that did not get hit, Slime and SDS are in the best positions to have the best seasons in BCS. SDS's top to representation ratio is the best of any deck with more than 12 tops. It was only on about 11% of teams, but it made it into top 8 about 17% of the time. And that's a really, really significant jump. Way outperformed its representation. And I think that that's the kind of thing that you can carry into BCS, which is why I think SDS is my, like, top of the meta. I don't want to say dark horse. People are definitely talking about it. But that's definitely my pick for, like, the deck that's going to have the best season in BCS, if nothing else changes. Spy Family. Everyone is on the Fiona Pants package. It had a pretty good season. 22 tops, 11 top 4s, 4 wins. Almost 7% of teams had it, but it was only on a little under 6% of topping teams. The first deck we're talking about that had an upside down top to rep ratio. 8 Pants was the deck of choice for most. Mostly, I think, because the Lloyd is just an easier thing to get online and use effectively. The Anya definitely has some stuff going for it, but there are some matchups where it's just not as good, and it's also a lot, but it is also a lot less expensive than the Lloyd. So you can start getting your Mochas at level 2. But obviously, you have to win with a Mocha, and I'm gonna be honest, winning with a Mocha never feels very good. It never feels like it's all that helpful, because the CX is always one card below whatever it is that you Mocha'd. 3-card Mocha is really good, though. I do like 3-card Mocha a lot, but you do have to more or less stick 3 attacks on your finishing turn with Anya, because you don't have any extra damage that's happening. So, like, one stray CX kind of ruins your day. So that's why I never could get into the choice list, personally. It's got some really nice stuff going on. Like, the change into the top check is really nice, allowing you to try to loop that choice. It does sit big and all that stuff. But yeah, Spy Family. I think most people are considering it as like a tier 2 option for fall, and I think that's about right. I don't think it's quite as good as a lot of the new stuff. I don't think it's as good as Slime and SDS, but it's definitely good. It's definitely playable, and it really will do well in Swiss, because a lot of stuff just does not have any way to deal with all of the defensive top checking that the set gets to do. Like getting to move a climax from the top spot to the second spot, or moving it from the third spot to the second spot, or, moving it from the first spot to the third spot, like getting to choose when you cancel is so powerful, because it just moves you through an extra card or two to your next climax.
Mm-hmm. And we saw that kind of even towards the end of the Dal era, we saw that kind of mechanic was something that was helping to both carry the Dal set, even when other things were starting to catch up to it. The mechanic to be able to rearrange where your climax is and to prepare yourself better for cancel defensively, huge.
Yeah, and 8 Pants has those ridiculous games too, where it's like you just fix so many cancels and you're getting so much stock because like you're not losing your board because they're sitting big, so you like play one counter and you get to keep 2 of them, and then you just put the third one back, combo again because you're on 8 Pants, change again, and then by the time your opponent's at 3-0 and they're trying to go into their finishing turn, you're still at like 1-6, and you just refreshed, 8 out of 19, and you have like 12 stock. Like, that does happen sometimes. And when it does, it's like, oh my goodness. Like, there's just no good way to fight this when you really let it get going. It's not unlike playing Slime back in the early days, back when the Shizu memory package just made it so that there was just no good way to stick even 2 on Slime. When 8 Pants rolls, you just can't stick anything on it. So 8 Pants will have those games from time to time, and it has enough of them that it's definitely still competitively viable. I fully expect to see it top several events in the fall. I would not be surprised at all to see it win.
I also think that you also run into that kind of consistency issue too, and that's why we see a higher representation than we do see topping right here, is that because it does also be a little bit more high roll-esque, that you will have games where that does not happen, and that'll keep you out of top cut.
Also worth mentioning with like the representation numbers versus the top percentage, something that I imagine at least a couple of people have already, been thinking about, is that sometimes a set is just popular and people pick it up and they take it to events even when they are not necessarily like competitive players. Which, I mean, that Weiss is a anime card game. Like, of course that's going to happen. You're going to have people who show up to events just playing the thing they want to play. And some people just wanted to play Spy Family because the show is new and it's fun and it's like an IP people really like. Slime's been out for a minute. Hololive's been out forever at this point. It feels like it. Spy Family is like new. Maybe it's someone's first set, right? Like Spy Family has a fan base that, maybe got into Weiss because of Spy Family. I could totally see some of that representation being juiced by a handful of newer players who are playing a new cheap fun set, which is something that Spy Family is. You can build Spy Family for not a lot of money right now. So I could absolutely see that being a thing. Moving on, quintuplets. Still relevant after all this time, and still with 3 different decks. None of these decks will die. 8 salvage, 8 standby, 8 choice. Just a waifu player's dream, this set. Still manages to be relevant. And, all 3 of them are good. And all 3 of them are good for different reasons. 8 salvage is still my favorite, because I just think that plussing engine is insane. And being able to turn that plussing engine into a pretty solid top end is pretty good. I just think that it plays the smoothest out of the 3. But 8 choice has gotten more popular among high-level players. Like, you hear really good players talking about how much they like 8 choice, and I can see why. We are walking into a meta where maybe big stuff on board is not the thing you want to hang your hat on entirely, and we're going to get into that in, about 60 seconds. But Quints, definitely still relevant. I think 8 salvage is the most BCS meta-proof of the 3, but, if you're still playing Quints, all right, go for it. It's clearly still working.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that we've seen big enough spread here between them that that you're more as pretty well likely to see any of these ones as much as you are any of the others. So realistically, it's hard to evaluate what kind of Quints you're going to be seeing because you could see any of them.
It is a set you have to be fully ready for. And by this point, you should have a pretty good idea of what the 3 decks are trying to do to a certain extent. If you've been playing competitively the last couple of years, you've seen more Quints than you care to think about. So you should have some idea what they do, but if you're going into fall, you should get some reps against these, refresh your memory a bit. The deck is still relevant, whichever flavor it takes. It's very possible you'll run into it, especially in late rounds of Swiss. So it's worth being attentive to that. All right. Brandon, let's talk about it. Overlord. Okay, I'm going to make 2 arguments. I'm going to pretend to be 2 different people for a second, okay? Person 1. Overlord is the best deck in the meta or one of the best decks in the meta. There's almost nothing that deals with Ainz. The Burn 1 events are extremely powerful. The deck has a lot of lines of play that a lot of players don't exploit, and it has ways around its more problematic matchups. Ainz is extremely good value and an extremely good combo that is almost impossible to turn off. All you have to do is side once. The best players who play Overlord do very well with it. A lot of the good players didn't play Overlord this season because they were on things like Chainsaw Man. Now that the top 3 sets have gotten hits, Overlord is going to soar in representation, especially amongst the best competitive players, and it's finally going to get its results that we've all known are coming. It just needed the player base to jump on it. And now that that player base is here and going to play a lot of Overlord this year, we're going to see Overlord finally dominate the meta the way that we know that it can. That's person 1. Person B. Overlord hasn't done anything since it dropped. We've been waiting for the Ainz Boogeyman to be more than a 2nd or 3rd tier results maker since the set dropped, and it hasn't happened. Its representation and top ratios are not impressive and haven't been in any season. It's never had a season where it was dominant. And it always seems that for some reason, the meta is just not kind to Overlord for some reason or another. That the best players aren't playing Overlord because there have just been better things to play. Overlord gives you a bunch of free pluses every game. It's very susceptible to damage rush, and it loves to clock itself. It loves to shorten games in ways that can backfire on it really hard. And there are several ways to play around the Ainz, some of which involve getting it off the board by getting rid of its back row support, and there are more and more cards in more and more good decks that can do that. So Overlord has been overrated pretty much its entire existence, and the people who say that it's going to do well this season are coping. Those are the two people, Brandon. I don't think you are either of those people. I think you are on the B side of the line. And for what it's worth, I am also on the B side of the line, but I don't think I'm quite as far on the B side of the line as you. I believe in Overlord when it's being piloted by a really good player. Like, when you see a really good player on Overlord, you go, oh, that is really good. But it is a hard deck to get that maximum value out of. And I think there are only a handful of players that can really do that.
It is. I also think that, in many ways, the Overlord that dominated JP all that time ago, before the sweeping bans then, also played into a slightly slower meta. Which I think that English is about a turn faster on average, and I think part of it comes from Hololive. Now, with Hololive being hit, is it still going to be as fast? I think it probably will. I don't think it's ever going to slow down. With that in mind, it makes it more challenging, I think, for Overlord in that way, because you have to try to do all those things with a turn less. But at the same time, can it do that? Yes, absolutely. Is this season where it probably might happen? Probably, actually. I think that Overlord is actually going to do really well this season, and it's less because of the deck itself, but I think a lot of good players are going to switch back to Overlord this season. So that were on Chainsaw Man. The Chainsaw Man players are going to switch back to Overlord because they already still have the deck, if that makes sense. Like, the ones that had the deck before switched off of it to Chainsaw Man are switching back to Overlord.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that in a world where Overlord's worst nightmare is decks that just stick a whole lot of damage on it and it doesn't have time to set up all of its things, losing Chainsaw Man almost entirely, Gura's representation taking a significant hit because of the limit to 2, and Avatar not being able to do its extra attack nonsense, Slime and SDS are not as aggressive at pushing damage in the mid-game, and I think that matters. Spy Family, not a particularly aggressive damage pusher. Like, even if it's playing 8 1k1s, it doesn't have, more than 20 soul triggers, right? Like, I think that there is a very real possibility that this meta is a half a step slower. Is it slow enough for Overlord to look like it did in the JP meta that it was rolling in? I don't know. I don't know. I'm of two minds on this, because, like, on one hand, it's like, if it's not getting results, then why do I care, right? If it's not getting results, then why should I think it's good? But on the flip side, it has been in a meta that hasn't been as kind to it, because the EN meta is faster than the JP meta. EN players want to play the game more quickly, and they want to push more damage earlier than the JP meta does. That's just a playstyle thing. That's just how the meta evolved. And that's not good for Overlord. It's just not. And that's why, especially, I think, like, Caligura really can take advantage of that. I think that Chainsaw Man slamming a Stock Soul every single turn can take advantage of that. And I'm not as confident that a Standby Pants Slime, you know what I mean, or a Pants Choice Spy Family is going to do that. There's definitely still damage in this meta. Obviously, there's still a lot of damage in this meta. But yeah, I'm of two minds on Overlord. I really hesitate to say that anything that, hasn't really gotten a ton of results in the last year and a half is suddenly going to, burst forth and be the great thing that so many people have said that it is. But at the same time, the time is right for it. Like, the meta is right for Overlord to have a really good season, especially because it can disrupt that big slime board. We'll see. If it's going to do it, it's going to be this year, though. If Overlord does not have a dominant season this fall, it's not going to have one, I don't think. If it's going to happen, like, show me. I want to see it, right? Like, I'm not going to talk a bunch of mess about Overlord here, because I do think it's very capable, and I think that it can have a really good season, but if it's going to have the good season, it's got to be this one. I think you and I are probably, like, two of the loudest people who aren't as high on Overlord. Like, a lot of people we respect, people who are very smart and are very good players, have very high opinions of Overlord. And I think that makes a lot of sense. I think that there's a lot in the set to respect and like. But I do want to see more results with Overlord before I say that it's really top tier. And we'll see. We'll see early, right? We could see as early as France. If Overlord is suddenly on 3 of the teams in top 8, then it's like, oh, this might actually be Overlord's moment. Moving on, Guilty Gear. Friendship ended with Ram Lethal. Eno is my best friend now. That Eno deck is great. I like that Eno deck a ton. That's a fun deck. That deck is really fun. Props to Avis. Like, that's such a cool list. It's got a lot of good text on a card that you get to play a lot of times over the course of a game. Like, you get to do a lot of stuff with that Eno.
I think it's fine. I think it's a fine deck. Being able to come down early is really helpful. Being able to play into something very quickly is ideal in a lot of ways. I think it's going to be an interesting spot coming this next season. I think it's fine. I think it being where it is on this list is going to be in a very similar spot to where it's going to be in the next season as well. I think it's going to be under the other ones that have already come through in terms of representation. And I think that that's going to be a big factor for it going forward, is it's not going to have the representation that it might want in order to see some of the tops in representation that way. Like, there might be a bigger field, there's just not as many tops.
Guilty Gear definitely outperformed my expectations this year. I didn't think the set was all that good. I thought there were a lot of interesting and fun cards in it. I thought it was a really fun set to build and to theory craft, but I didn't think its ceiling was all that high. So I'm really impressed that it's done as well as it has. It definitely outperformed my expectations for it. The representation in top rates right in line with something that's pretty solidly mid-tier. So, yeah, no, I think Guilty Gear is poised to have a perfectly fine BCS. If you played Guilty Gear in the spring and you want to keep playing it, you can do so, and it will still be competitively viable. All right, let's go through this also receiving votes section down here. 3 winners in this group: Dal, Licorice Recoil, and Sword Art. I think it was the 8-bar Mother Rosario Sword Art that got that win. As far as tops go, Azure Lane with 12. I mean, it's Cats. Cats will keep Azure Lane relevant forever. Just because it can, stick 12 on turn 1. And anything that can stick 12 damage on turn 1 by accident will just always be relevant, because Bang Dream's never going to die because it's always going to get more support. And then the rest of this is just like, it's a bunch of reasonable good stuff decks. Dal just has a bunch of good profiles. Danmachi has, a really still solid mid-game engine, even if the top end is pretty lackluster. Kind of same with Lyco Recco, just good cards generically. Arifureta has a good game plan. The early damage push / resource generation game plan is pretty good. It has a very significant weakness, because that one card does need to go to memory, and it needs to get reversed to go to memory, so you can absolutely just deny it the whole game, and make their lives much more difficult. And I think that caused Arifureta a lot of problems when it got to top tables. But MTI is just, still a pretty normal standby package for the most part. Sometimes you'll see the bar there as well. Review Starlight. Ben from Refresh Point said he was going to he's going to do a deck tech kind of thing, or he was going to do a write-up about Review Starlight. I want to play this deck, man, but I don't know how to get the value out of it that you're getting out of it. He's a good player. He's a really good player. And he said he was going to do a write-up on Review Starlight, and I need it. But yeah, AOT, Grisaya, Konosuba, Sword Art, Saikano, pretty normal stuff that you would expect to kind of get a random top in a BSF. I do have a question for you, Brandon. It's a trivia question. It's a trivia question. Okay, so can you name the one set that had a 100% top percentage out of known data that had more than one top? There's one set. It had more than one top, and it had 100% conversion into top 8. Do you know what set that happened to be?
I have a feeling I know what set that is, and I already hate it. It's going to be Haruhi.
Yes, it's Haruhi. Of course it's Haruhi. Haruhi. Still relevant. I'd say we were back, but we never left. But yeah, no, Haruhi's fun. Adventure Time, Batman Ninja, a very weird fate list. Goblin Slayer, Gun Gale was also the only other deck to have a 100% conversion rate. So the one GGO that we know existed got a top. Dragon Maid with a top. Ruby with a top. So yeah, there's nothing down here that I think is that great, if I'm being honest. Like, I'm not trying to play any of this in singles in a competitive environment this fall. Like, I think Azure Lane has a really high ceiling, just because like it does all that early game damage rush. And I really think that the list that Mark took when we went top 4 in Chicago was actually really good, because it's mostly just all game like oppressive nonsense soul rush. So like Azure Lane is still quite relevant. I hate it. Ban cats. But like there's nothing else here that I'm not expecting any of this stuff to like come out and have a really great fall. Like, Bang Dream will definitely get representation. It'll get a handful of tops just because it's Bang Dream. It has a massive loyal player base and still has a couple of the best cards in the meta. Like, Buns is still ridiculous. Still one of the most broken cards they've ever printed. But yeah, nothing here really sticks out to me as like, ooh, this is a sneaky deck to watch out for in the fall. The time of the dragons has passed. It's very sad, but we had a good run. Dragon Maid. We'll always have that top 4 at Rumble. We'll always have that. But yeah, no, Dragon Maid officially no longer relevant in the competitive meta, but that's okay. The deck still makes me happy. But yeah, I think that's everything for the BSF graphic. We've talked about this for over an hour. Don't know how long that's going to cut down to in editing, but yeah. What do you think here, Brandon? Is there anything that really sticks out to you that we didn't talk about?
I think we covered just about everything that was really relevant from this last season. Looking ahead, we had the 3 sets that had bans, so we're looking at essentially those being cut down a peg or two, while everything else kind of moves up. As we look at the new stuff coming out, we'll look at that specifically in another video in the near future.
Yes, there will be a video where we talk about all of the decks. It's what we do going into every new competitive season. We will have that video. It will exist. Looking at the release schedule, I think the most interesting stuff, obviously like Hololive getting some support, it's going to matter. Heard some rumblings about Shauna being pretty good. Freeren's got a couple of good profiles, but nothing really super powerful on the current EN release schedule, which I think might long-term prompt Bushiroad to do the thing that I have long held that they would never do. They could nuke this meta back to the Stone Age. If you watched Carmen's recent video over on Pittsburgh, first of all, you should do that. It's a very good video. Second, he talked about the JP reset, where JP hit a bunch of stuff with sweeping bans and then released a bunch of stuff that wasn't as powerful, and the meta became very different. Like, the overall power level of the meta dropped significantly. EN is kind of halfway there now. The bans that they just dropped were pretty big. They were bigger than I expected, because they haven't really been super harsh with the ban list by comparison. so I wasn't expecting as many hits as we got. But if we have a season where it's the old stuff, the Slime and the SDS, and the Overlord, that are the best decks in the meta, it would not shock me if Bushiroad went, okay, these decks have been good for long enough, and then hit them to try to open up the meta a little bit more. I'm not saying they will do that, nor am I saying they should do that. I'm saying if they wanted to do the big, we are going to set this meta back to a significantly lower power level thing, they took the first step towards that. I don't know if they're going to finish the job or not. I don't know what the plan is in the future for Bushiroad. I don't know if they're going to try to copy what JP did or whatever. But it's worth noting, and it's worth keeping that in the back of your head, that they did start down the path to a significant meta power level reset. So, we'll see what happens. I don't know. I didn't think this was happening at all. I didn't think that this was even a remote possibility just a few months ago. But now, seeing this ban list and seeing what the upcoming meta is looking like, there is a world in which Bushiroad does this. So, worth keeping an eye on, I think. The one other key change for BCS, it sounds like they're going to expanding Top Cut. Something we will, I'm sure, talk about in more detail when we get closer to the actual season. But yeah, they will start cutting to 16 for events that have at least 128 players. Big events, I think it's 256 players, they'll cut down to top 32.
I don't think we've had any for singles of that size yet, but we've definitely crossed that first threshold to top 16.
Oh yeah, in fact, it's quite common at the bigger events. So yeah, we're going to see some top 16s. I think this is a good move. I think expanding Top Cut makes a lot of sense because there are a lot of really good players who will go X2 and bubble out because, this is a card game, right? And in card games, sometimes stuff happens and you do get legitimately very unlucky. And I think it's a shame for someone to have, 2 rounds where everything goes precipitously wrong and there's nothing they could do about it and they don't make cut. I also think it will encourage people to stay in longer because you're far more likely to make the cut if you're X2. Whereas, it's if you go, 2-2 in the first 4 rounds, it's more likely you'll drop because almost no one who goes 2-2 in the first 2 rounds, even if they win out the rest of the way, they're still not making top cut because the record isn't good enough. Now, you have a much better chance to make it. So I wouldn't be surprised to see more people stay in. So maybe more competitive games as rounds continue, as you have fewer drops after, say, rounds 3 and 4. But yeah, we'll see what happens with that. I'm sure that there will be more conversation around that when we get closer to it. But in any case, at least wanted to make mention of that. But yeah, Brandon will have something out next week. And in 2 weeks, we'll be back with another Clock Talk. Thank you so much for joining us. Please like, share, comment, and subscribe. And have a good one.
We'll see you then.